Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jared and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
Today we have Sam Ridgewell with us, who is the founder and managing director of Empowered Development. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've been listening for a long time now. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. We have to get you a t-shirt as well.
I'd be very keen, yeah. And my colleague Emma, she's a huge fan, so she'd appreciate
Swag all the way around.
Anyone else? We'll get
the I got brownie points with Emma. Shout out, yeah.
If you send us messages, we'll try to get you something, people, so everyone can send in their details. But we were chatting before the show about sort of your journey both in sort of into the industry and then into what you're doing now at Empowered. Would love to this is one of our favorite questions, people in this space, is like, how did you sort of start your sort of journey into this industry more broadly? And then what made you sort of take the leap into sort of founder world, which Ben and I are obviously very familiar with?
Yeah. So it was an accident joining insurance. I'm sure you're very used to people telling you they fell into insurance. That was absolutely the case. But I didn't even realize I'd done it for a few weeks. So I did a degree in HR. I wanted a job in HR and financial services, and went for an interview with Liberty Syndicates at the time, and got the role. On my way to the interview, had kind of spoke to a friend about what kind of organisation they were and what a syndicate was, and they tried to educate me. I probably kind of parroted what they told me without really understanding it. I absolutely thought it was something to do with the bank. So even though I understood it was not the bank, I was saying I know it's part of a sister group, if you like, of the bank, whereas what he was trying to tell me is it's not Lloyd's, it's a syndicate of Lloyd's, assuming I knew what that meant. So I was about 3 weeks in before I realised Lloyd's had nothing to do with Lloyd's banking group. And by that point, I was just so confused as to how I didn't know that this was an industry and how exciting it was. And the more I discovered, the more I loved it. So I think, I worked really hard to try and change that for upcoming generations, because this should be a career choice. We have such a nice offering for people if they only know about it.
Yeah, completely. And I guess it's funny, there's a side story here that I don't think is the point of the episode, but it just crossed my mind based on what you were saying. But perhaps a number of years ago, the Lloyd's market as a whole was in a slightly different place in terms of its famousness. Lots of people knew about it, but not necessarily for good reasons, because we'd just had a lot of fallout from the whole asbestosis issues, having to rescue the market, lots of people losing all their money who'd invested in it. Since then, which is now a generation or more ago, we've now got really exciting stories to tell and really protected things to offer to the market. There's no more risk of individuals losing everything except their bedclothes by being a part of Lloyd's or whatever it is. So hopefully we're at a point where we can really celebrate the Lloyd's market and not shy away from being in the press and being well known to people on the street. Whereas I think, like you say, when I joined the industry, I didn't even know that it existed until I got my first role here.
Yeah, I think even if we date back to then, as much as it was a topic of conversation, I think it was probably, I wasn't around back then, so I'm happy to be corrected, but it was probably a conversation for people with a social standing. Yeah. So I would imagine that lots of people I know wouldn't have been talking about that, because even if they saw Lloyd's in the news, they would still be assuming it was maybe something to do with the bank, or just that it wasn't for them. So I do think there was kind of like a kind of a bigger conversation to be had for people involved, either as people working or investing in the market, that in itself would probably have not been the widest talent pool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that sort of central to then the mission that you have at Empowered, is sort of recognizing that it's a part of the market that is interesting, it's exciting, and there's a ton of opportunity here, but there's recognition that most of a generation is sort of utterly unaware it exists, and we're trying to sort of pull in and educate people sort of pre-joining the industry, and then sort of helping them on their journey through it. What is sort of the mission that you guys set out to accomplish at Empowered?
Yeah, so one of the things I used to do in my previous roles, so before I set up Empower Development, was a graduate scheme, and during that recruitment became very clear that most people wouldn't know what they were applying to unless they already knew someone in it. And I really believe that if you talk to anyone for 10 minutes, you can explain to them why insurance is a lot more interesting than people think. The issue is that people don't give you 10 minutes. So if you were out at career fairs and so on, the people that would stop and talk to you were the ones that already maybe had a bit of an interest in insurance, not the people who didn't. And for me, that was it just felt like a real gap in knowledge that was kind of really making one of the issues that we see, which is the lack of diversity in insurance, because we weren't even getting it at the application stage. So if your friends or family worked in the market, you probably knew about what we kind of likely call London's best kept secret. But the secret was very much contained to that friends and family. So for me, a big part of what I was doing then and what I continue to do and look for kind of more ways to do with Empower is to let that kind of cat out the bag, share the secret. And if you've got 10 minutes and you listen to it and you decide that insurance isn't for you, absolutely fine. I just kind of resent the idea that people don't know what they don't know and then don't get that choice in that career.
Yeah. Well, I think in the most common thread is people come into this industry in two ways, right? Either from sort of family lineage or completely by chance. And you're right, it just doesn't capture the imagination of people in the same way. And I think because for most people, the sort of introductory to the market or the industry as a whole is like selling car insurance or selling like it, and that's not interesting in comparison to what the London market and Lloyd's like specifically does with its the ability to sort of interrogate like really complex, unique things that you need sort of this expertise to understand and price it, etc. And if we can sort of present that as an opportunity, and I think now, and we'll talk about this, I think 'cause it's super interesting what you're doing, like how do you get in front of people in a generation now is easier than maybe it's ever been. The ability to sort of have virality in social media posts and getting in front of consumers who are like, I've just discounted this entire thing. And now there seems to be like, I'm hearing about this, I'm seeing these things, I'm intrigued now. Even if it is just, as you said, opening the door and having their interest piqued enough where they sort of go, I want to learn a bit more about that.
Yeah, because TikTok is certainly the platform that's changed the game. And TikTok is brilliant because its algorithm knows you very, very well. That's also the reason a lot of people find TikTok a little bit tricky because it's hard to put your phone down. If we play it to its strengths, though, what that means is it will know who's interested in my content. So if lots of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are looking potentially at studying or looking for a job afterwards are watching my content, TikTok will then think, oh, I know who enjoys this. I'm going to share it with more of them. So the pool becomes quite sort of targeted by the success of the watch time that you're getting from similar pools. So we know that we can put a video out and usually maybe less than 5% of the views will come from your followers. About 95% plus are coming from people who don't follow you. Now, lots of them are going to not be interested in my videos. That's absolutely fine. Those that are, though, have suddenly got a way of looking at that one video, going and finding more. There's playlists, so you can see things like career insights, learning about different jobs that people do in insurance, different events that are going on in the news, how they relate to what we do, job hunting tips, jobs that are available now, all these different ways that they can then really binge through the content. And then a lot of resources to direct people to where they can go and find the jobs as well. So as soon as you've captured them, you can almost funnel them in to a place where they can actually be straight away applying for the jobs.
That's super exciting. We've talked before about like the talent challenges in the market on the podcast. And so much of that effort is sort of after they've come in. Like how do we then, but there needs to be this sort of attention given to like pre-applicant pool growth. And how do you sort of, and I think you're right, it creates a really, really interesting opportunity and a really exciting one to open that beyond like, does your dad work in insurance right now?
Yeah.
Right? We can do more than that.
Do you think, because I think it's very timely and very brave, that you're leading this charge on TikTok for the industry because, that's a very scary new thing that's probably out of the familiarity of a lot of senior people within the industry and maybe are still just about comfortable with Facebook. I'm actually in that group as well. not even got started with Instagram yet. So yeah, is there an opportunity that's a bit unique for insurance here, or are you finding that actually all of the other industries are onto this before us as well? Are we leading, career promotion on TikTok, or is it like actually everyone's doing this, we've got to be on it?
tricky because the algorithm's always biased to what I'm watching.
Yeah.
So I can't represent what
Sure.
has on TikTok. I can only tell you what it shows me. I would say where we are unique is that we are an underrated industry.
Yeah.
So of course there's people talking about their banking and auditing, but grads know about that already.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're necessarily finding out new stuff. They're maybe getting tips on how to apply for those jobs. Whereas insurance TikTok is attracting people who haven't considered it as a career. And we can kind of cross over with insurers that are on, lawyers who are on TikTok, and we can talk about insurance law, for example. So what we can do then is link in with other messages that are going on to pull people in to understand that insurance isn't just underwriting and broking, and it is a whole industry.
Yeah.
So I think our opportunity is unique. We're probably not the only one on there. At the same time, I'm probably a little bit unique in that I can probably have a bit more of a sense of humour about the careers because of the nature of me being working for myself and being in this space uniquely that I am. Whereas if you were a corporate turning up on TikTok, you would have to kind of maybe be a little bit more cautious about how you post things, and also maybe getting things checked by marketing and so on before you do. So there's a delay there. So I can jump onto a trend straight away and do a voiceover that's going viral or whatever in that moment if I fancy it, where that might not be an opportunity otherwise.
Yeah, I think we've talked about kind of the parallels in the journey that you're on there and the sort of niche fame that you have, and is similar to the niche fame I think we have on the podcast. But in a very similar way, this podcast works because there isn't like this big corporate marketing team that has to approve what we're going to talk about. And you listen to some other firms that have a podcast, they do like a renewals report or similar on. It's very just dry, sort of structured this way. And what actually is engaging as sort of viewers or listeners is like someone being authentic about what's exciting about a space and where there's opportunities and what's frustrating, but not feeling like, oh, I don't know if marketing's going to greenlight my commentary on this. And I think you have a really unique position then to be that voice of a generation who's sort of seeing and exploring this without sort of the corporate bow that sort of extracts the authenticity from it.
Yeah. And we can work together with corporates. So for example, Zurich have a page for their graduates and their apprentices, and their grads run that page and their apprentices run that page. And then we repost their stuff. So anything that I see anyone else doing, if I know that our followers are interested in insurance careers, I absolutely want more people on TikTok. Like I would love this to be a shared space with lots and lots of people posting. That would take the little bit of pressure off me as well, like how the frequency I feel like I need to be posting. So I'm very keen to direct followers to other pages that kind of are doing that have the same objective, really.
Yeah. Well, there's a similar there's like the hard market on Instagram, and there's some others who have amazing sort of social presences, but again it's this sort of behind the scenes view of this industry, and I think it's giving leveling the playing field, as you said. Like everyone knows banking, everyone knows big consultancies, et cetera. So when you're at uni, that sort of feels like the obvious pools. If all we do is bring insurance to be a level option of like, oh, I'm looking at a number of syndicates, a couple big banks, a couple consultancies. If we're at least in that conversation, that's going to transform the sort of talent pool, because there is this risk of the talent pool sort of draining out in our industry, isn't it? A little bit more over the next several years. Is that a concern that you're trying to tackle?
So my concern over the next few years is the shortage of skilled talent, the pipeline that we have coming through. So I think we've all seen over the last couple of years that there's a talent shortage, particularly with people who are sort of stepping up from junior to people who can kind of be maybe a supported expert, if you like. So they have some authority, but they're not the senior in the team. And I've got a few theories as to where I think that's come from. Certainly, we saw an impact through COVID of people learning slower because they're spending more time at home on their own, and also being focused on doing things like processing because that was easy to do at home on your own. So I think a lot of the osmosis learning and so on that people regularly talk about absolutely was pulled back. There's another concern that I've seen, which is hierarchies used to have a lot of entry roles at the bottom. And a lot of those roles have now been outsourced or replaced with technology. So we now have less entry roles at the bottom, so that the future talent has essentially shrunk. And because we are not necessarily all learning as fast as we used to because of hybrid working, and there's not necessarily the structured learning in place to keep that at the same pace it was, the learning is also slower. So if we look at where we might be in 5 years from now, the amount of people we have ready to set up as underwriters will be less, because there are less underwriting assistants anyway, and we've often, not always, but often taken them through a slower journey of progression. So people will be jumping up a lot earlier than maybe what their experience and knowledge levels have been in the past, which is what we're seeing at the moment with these sort of implications of the talent shortage right now.
Yeah, and I guess one implication of that sort of tighter pipeline and requirement for people to jump up higher is a greater emphasis on training and continuous learning, which is another big part of what you do, I suppose.
Yeah, and hopefully that's where we come in. Absolutely. So I think structured learning is more necessary than in the past. I think when I joined the market, the idea of putting people on a 12-month program and so on was not always necessarily, certainly not something people were looking at, because you would just be following round your senior and learning everything from them. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So we do need to replace it with something structured. And also, if people are spending a day or two or whatever it might be that they're working at home, and they have the freedom to learn when they want to, they can maximize that time they're spending with their experienced individuals by learning from them, and the time they're spending on their own by learning in a kind of more structured, formulaic way. Yeah,
that makes sense. And how is the way we learn changing, I guess, as well? Because I go back to when I did my CII qualifications and things, and it was very much, we had a textbook. We had somebody who would come in and help us work through the textbook from time to time. That was part of our grad scheme. And then I'd actually go and do written exams, and you do a written paper. But
double up.
Yeah.
Two in a sitting.
all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Actually, we might as well do a tangent. This is the Reinsurance podcast. Coming from the countryside, I took the great luxury of taking my CII exams in a small town in the countryside rather than going to like the Excel Centre in London, because I did one exam there and it was like there are 2,000 people in this room, and like the number of desks seems to like morph in a kind of weird way as you just look into the distance. You're like, I didn't even know you could have this endless sea of desks and people doing this exam. And the countryside version, because fewer and fewer people now work as a local broker at a shop, a physical storefront for insurance. They've still got the sort of legacy setups for all these places all around the world. Yeah. And so my setup was an exam hall where I was one of 3 candidates in total.
Okay.
It was in the wedding room of a 15th century hotel, where we had white tablecloths and everybody had a jug of water on their table that you could help yourself to through the exam. So very luxe exam experience compared to the other ones.
No, I had similar in Brighton, and there was a lady knitting the entire time as we were doing our exams, which was
reassuring.
Very relaxing. Yeah.
So for those who sort of follow the Lloyd's test system, I took the LLMIT. So before it was LM1 and LM2, it was sort of a merged one. I took it in the States. And similar to the British countryside, very few people are taking this exam in Minnesota. So it was a room of I think there was 2 or 3 of us. Yeah. And it was just a very sad testing room that's probably does driving test exams or something, other things. There was no white tablecloths and fancy.
A corner of IHOP.
Yeah, exactly.
So how's it changed now?
Oh, it's vastly different. And the CII have done a really good job at making it a lot more available. I think the idea of sort of sitting exams in April, and if you fail, waiting 6 months to resit it, that put a lot of pressure on. So you can sit your exams any day of the week right now, any hour of the day, at home or in exam centre. Exam centres, caveat, aren't open 24/7, but if you're sitting at home, you've got more freedom there. So there's a lot more accessible, and if you fail, you can then resit, a week later rather than wait to lose all of that knowledge. So that's much better. From our perspective, Empower Development, we were very conscious that those textbooks are not the way that people want to absorb information anymore. A bit like TikTok, people want to watch short videos, what they want, when they want. So at the beginning of lockdown, me and a colleague, Grace, we kind of thought, should we have a go? It really was like that. It was like, should we just have a go at turning one of these books into an online course?
That's cool.
We had no idea what was ahead of us. I don't think we probably would have started if we knew what we had to do to finish. But we converted it into videos. So we'd be on videos, we do cartoons, we do practice questions, posters, just anything that we thought was a variety of resources to help different types of learners. And then they could just log in and access it and watch it as many times as they wanted, whenever they wanted. We do a very popular thing called like a 1 hour, like what you need to know. So summing up the whole book in an hour.
Wow.
So we don't recommend that as the only thing you do.
Be quite full on.
Yeah, but as you're approaching, like you're cramming, that's worthwhile looking at then. And then we put it out to some students and we just said, what do you think? And people loved it. And they were like, can we have it for this module? I'm like, well, we haven't got that far yet. We were just testing. So, fast forward a few years and we've got nearly 40 modules now, including some in Arabic, that we have available for people for Cert, DIP and ACII. And it really, the feedback we get from students is incredible because it just allows you to work towards whatever your learning style is.
Yeah. That's really exciting. And I was going to joke because Jared used to have this. I don't used to have this. Jared used to have a very impressive memory when it came to like knowing all of the Lloyd syndicate's numbers up. And I was just in my head trying to remember all the different topics you can do within the CII because I was always impressed by the breadth of things you can study.
Yeah.
So I actually got to learn lots of things that I'd always wanted to learn but hadn't actually had a chance before. Obviously, Reinsurance, which I feel was like P92 or 70. I can't
M97.
remember. M97,
Yeah.
okay. So I was way
Well, it was
off. Don't have yours.
P97 then.
P97, yeah.
Oh,
I
pretty accurate.
530 or something, economics
and
and
business. 92 is
Yes.
business and
That was
finance,
cool.
so you would have done that one as
Yeah,
well.
that'd be why. And then,
And fun at parties.
yeah, but
So are we. So are we.
but like some of these topics, it was great. We were doing like, I
If
remember
you're going
one
to
of-
digitize the reinsurance one, we should do that on the podcast. We will.
We
will
have
sit
that. We
down.
have that one as an online course. We'll set you up. You can watch some cartoons and
Yeah. We should.
pop them in.
But they're seriously interesting topics, right? I remember learning about, the elasticity curves of supply and demand and so on. And the one extra one that I did that was really fun, especially because I was doing a law night school thing at the same time, was the commercial insurance contract wording, I think, and then also the insurance law ones. And in those books, they have all these different cases, and you get to learn like all of the really interesting cases that define insurance law. And it's a really formative part of like us being reinsurance nerds, I think, in some way. For me, at least, a lot of mine came from going through that process of learning just all of these really interesting niches of the industry and getting lost in, I never realized that this was how they decided, what had to count as an insurance claim or indemnity or fault or, whatever, all those things.
No, I think like so much of what we do in insurance as a market, we've worked out what to do based on things that have gone wrong in the past.
Yep.
And I think that works, right? As long as we're learning, looking at our mistakes. And when you look at the law module in particular, it is just like a whole load of stories of like, well, this happened and that was quite confusing because they thought this and they thought that. So we decided this. Yep. And that's now why it's really clear because, we follow these rules. So I think you learn a lot of things you don't know or you understand the why behind the things you take for granted in it.
Yep.
I liken it to doing your driving test, right? Like if you did your driving test, purely by doing a theory test. Of course, that is not a good example of what's a good driver. You do need to learn how to actually do the job and go out and have some experience. At the same time, you don't want people on the road that never did a theory test. You want people to understand what those signs mean. So when we're all looking at the same thing, we understand, we have consensus of what that is about. So I really think, that like we should encourage it more, actually. Like I do think, again, I kind of saw a bit of a cultural drop after COVID. I remember, it's probably similar for you, walking around the office and just seeing books on people's desks in the old days. I feel too young to say in the old days, but, age is coming. And that would kind of create this sort of peer support group and just kind of this consensus of, everyone else is doing it, I should do it, which isn't there anymore. People can feel quite lonely and isolated on their CII journey and maybe not aware of how many people are doing it. We actually have a Facebook group, I should say, as well, which has 1,100 members in it. Anyone can join. And people just ask each other advice about their exams. We're not allowed to discuss coursework questions on it. We do monitor everything that gets posted on it. But because people can just feel like they're sitting it on their own. And I really enjoyed sitting as part of a group of people.
Yeah. Even like when you're going away to revise or like the benefit when it was the big test days, but at least everyone there is building up towards like, 2 Fridays from now we've got so there's this sort of collective like alignment of people are going home early on the weekend. It's this sort of push towards that. But I think you're right. When it's everyone doing it in their homes or in their bedrooms, like by themselves, it feels like, what's the point of doing this big thing? Because you don't have that sort of collection that all your other peers at Lloyd's or at your insurer where you're at are doing this as well. And there's like this journey you're all sharing. I think it's important.
Yeah.
What is the most effective way that you find now to kind of connect those individuals up? So obviously you have the Facebook group being one. TikTok is consumed relatively independently, but there's still some element of...
I believe people share some TikToks on WhatsApp groups. They are encouraged to. The most meaningful thing I think that we've probably done in that space over the last few years is a networking group called Springboard. So we train a lot of grads and apprentices in September and October, and we train them often on things like networking and relationship. And I can remember a few years ago, like rooms of people looking back at me going, where are we meant to meet these brokers? Or where are we meant to meet these underwriters? And I know very much the next day I'm going to meet them and talk to them about the same thing. So we just kind of thought we've probably got this audience of people who are walking into their first job, who are really keen and eager. At the same time, if you are 19 or 21 and you walk into an under 35s event, as much as under 35s feels like it's for young professionals, it's not really the easiest room for you to walk into when you're kind of only a few months into your corporate career. So we launched a group called Springboard. And Springboard the idea is to springboard people to the other networking groups. So we want them and we will help them find these other groups like Under 35s and YMC and so on, and send out newsletters each month of events that we see that they might want to go to. But their initial events, if they come through Springboard, will be with other people who are in their first 2 years, who are very much equally as lost and new and excited, but nervous about all of the things that they're experiencing. And then by the time they go into these other events, they'll hopefully have some familiar faces, and some friends. And I think that's really important for them to build confidence in networking. Comfort zones I saw reduce dramatically with COVID again. And we can kind of take for granted, like, just walk in a room, just go in, and it's quite a scary thing to do. So allowing people to kind of build that confidence in what is quite a safe, relatable space is one thing. But also, like, working in this market in your 20s can be really good fun. You find some lifelong friends in it, and if you are starting a job and maybe there's not a huge amount of people starting at a similar time to you, you're quite kind of isolated in your role, you might miss that. And then we might lose people that would actually be able to stay in the industry if we were kind of still having that environment where you can kind of find your peer group early on.
Yeah, it is crazy, as you say. I'm going to get Cordy to do a fact check. Do you know how old the French Prime Minister is at the moment? Like 35 or something that Macron's just named. Whoever looked that up. But like, we're reaching this point where, it really, talent can start to lead from quite a young age. And if we want to lean into that, and especially in a world where, technology is advancing so quickly, and, different people might lean into that more easily than others, etc. If we let that opportunity slide and we don't really take the chance to educate all this great talent that we're hopefully bringing in once they've found us on TikTok, etc., we could lose a generation potentially of huge potential. That will
34 was the answer.
Wow. 34, thank you. Yeah. I was going to say 34 as well.
Yeah, but it sounded almost too young. You hedged up to 35.
I thought it'd be showing off if I got it exactly right.
Yeah. But I think if just... Tangent City. Welcome to the podcast. We do tangents a lot. I think the minimum you have to be an American president is 35. I don't think you're allowed to even run until you're 35.
Yeah, and it's another funny part, isn't it, when you look at the presidential race in the US and the age there.
They both have cleared 35 now.
Twice. Right.
Twice over, yeah, exactly.
And also it's funny because for lots of boards, for example, in the US in particular, they have a suggested or often enforced retirement age within their sort of terms of reference of like 70.
Yeah.
So funny age, but we digress.
We digress indeed.
So when we talk about the problem here, so the shortage of talent, how do you think that will start to manifest, given, for example, we've got this crazy Gen AI revolution happening in the background. We've got COVID that's just happened, where lots of people missed out on all those, face-to-face osmosis that we talked about. When do you think we'll start to see the effects of that, and what will those effects be?
I think we already have.
Crystal ball out.
Yeah, no, I think we've definitely already seen it, and I assume this isn't a surprise to anyone. Apologies if it is, if I'm the one that kind of breaks it, but people have been moving around for quite large salary increases over the last couple of years. Because if you were progressing kind of fast and you were able to show and demonstrate that you're ready to step up for the next role, there were really more jobs than there were people able to do that. So people have been able to ask for considerable pay rises, quite surprising ones actually, and get them because there just wasn't enough people ready to step up into those roles. And I think the nature of a hierarchy, there's always only a handful of roles at the top. I don't think that's where our issue is going to be. Those roles are always going to be we hope there'll be enough talent to fill them. It's those ones in the middle where there's still quite a high volume, but you do need people who can go out and run a meeting on their own, go on a business trip on their own, who can take accountability for pricing and guidelines and all of your underwriting or relationship management. It's that level of kind of decision making, comfort outside your comfort zone, independence. That's where we've seen that kind of gap, just shortage really. There is enough people to kind of go into it, but because we're not spoilt for choice, they've been getting big pay rises, and that I think is what's going to continue, because these entry roles, people aren't necessarily going outside their comfort zone as much as they used to, and if they are, they're maybe on their own doing so that kind of support structure and so on that we have in place when people are around the office all the time, it's just not naturally there, and it doesn't need to be there in the same way it used to be. We just need to find a way to consciously replace it.
How are you seeing the role of remote versus hybrid versus people going fully back to work having an impact on that? Are you seeing that being something that companies are pushing more to bridge that? Again, if you're not giving people enough face-to-face exposure, they're not learning as much through osmosis, and they're not building like their comfort to independently deliver messages, all of those things will begin to, in many ways, constrain their ability to then walk into a client meeting on their own because they've not been building that skill set up. Are you seeing companies pushing back for those types of growth opportunities? There
is such a spread of companies' attitudes towards this. So there are some companies who are like, we are 5 days a week. And they advertise as that. So when you go in, you know that. And for some people at some points, that's perfect. They're fine with that. So we do have some organizations, but they are a minority. And then we have some that are very flexible. And, as long as you're in 1 day a week or one every 2 weeks, fine. Most seem to sort of fall somewhere in the middle still, where they're saying sort of 2 to 3 days, but really it's up to teams. So if you work in finance, maybe there's less need for you to come in as often. I'm starting to see be a little bit more comfortable saying, actually, no, we do have an opinion as an employer. Whereas I think after COVID, everyone was kind of scared to say that, because there was on social media, we saw a lot of it on LinkedIn, this kind of messaging of, how dare you as an employer tell me where I'm meant to be. And I do think there should be kind of, maturity and autonomy around this. At the same time, if people are not going to come into the office very often, we need to be honest about how that can, not always will, but can impact your development, your growth, your potential, your network. And if we're not telling people that, if we're not upfront about that, we're only setting them up to not progress in the same timeline that they maybe think they're going to. And then those people that are coming in 5 days a week, actually, in 5 years, 10 years' time, I would be very interested to see the difference later down the line. And I would, of course, there's going to be anomalies, but I would definitely see there's going to be a trend in people that progress faster in correlation with people that come into the office more often, not all the time, but more often. And the other thing that you'll hear me talk about is just the idea that we're all going to come in on the same days of the week and the city is going to be there for us. Like, I just think it's so unfair on the City of London for us to not come in on Fridays and just collectively agree that we don't have to, and then expect there to be businesses that are going to provide us lunch and Marks and Spencer's, that was my emergency shopping. If I had a shoe issue or something I could just pop into, there's nowhere I can go to now, because we weren't there for it won't be there for us. So I do think we do need to find a way of making sure that, it's really, I'm really not saying that everybody needs to be in every day of the week, but we can't not come in on Fridays. I'm trying to work a little catchphrase out. I'm sitting on it like this at the moment. If Thursdays is the new Fridays, is Friday the new Sunday?
Interesting.
Because when we're in the City of London, Fridays are just not a work day. Well,
and especially we talked about the London market a lot on the show, but you look at sort of the New Moon and Old Tom's and the sort of pubs, like they make most of their money on the Fridays. And if everyone works from home on the Fridays, they'll make some on Thursdays because people will go out on the Thursday evening, but it's not going to be the same crowd because they're or the same amount because they know people still have to work even if it's from home the next day. So you're going to see those establishments begin to struggle, and those sort of well-established businesses in like Leadenhall Market, which is famous for the insurance space here, will begin to change and dry up, and people wonder what that looks like. We have a friend visiting in from Bermuda this week, and he was downtown, and it's like it's just all tourists now, like doing the Harry Potter tours and these things, which is fun, and I support but that used to be a Saturday, Sunday activity because during the week it was always like the insurance industry was there. Yeah. And now it's like, well, if we're not going to be there, they will, as a business, move their marketing and move their branding to try to attract other crowds, and it's just not going to be that group of individuals that are city workers.
Yeah. And also it's half term, so last Friday was busier than a normal Friday, and I think this Friday will be busier than a normal because there's more tourists of half term. I went round Leadenhall Market to ask some business owners recently about the impact, and Giorgio's, they said normally get 100 people in on a Thursday. They had 2 booked in for that Friday. And we're expecting it to be there for us, Simpsons, like it's sad, right? We want them there for us. We need to be there for them as well. So I'm passing out a problem here without a solution. I know that, but I think we just got to have some accountability on it.
I think it's very interesting, isn't it? And going back to what you said earlier about the spread of responses from management teams of all the different firms around the market. It reminds me of a game we used to play when I was a child. At like Scouts or whatever. I can't remember. I wasn't a scout. One of the ones beneath the scout. Where everyone's in the middle of a room with 4 corners or something, and somebody shouts like, "Okay, if you think this, run to that corner. If you think this, run to the other corner. If you think this, run to the other corner." It probably has a name and probably has much more interesting rules. But what would happen is sometimes everyone would all go to the same corner. Sometimes some people would go to one corner, some to another. And this planting of the flag in the ground becomes very risky, I guess, for a firm that says, okay, if you want to work 5 days a week, come to my corner. If you want to go fully remote, come to my corner. And if you make a really bold claim like that early on, you could suddenly find that all your talent leaves and goes somewhere else because actually, if you don't really understand, right, people might suddenly choose to go elsewhere. So this issue could really drive like a lot of talent movement between firms. And I wonder the extent to which firms are able to guess or to understand, on one hand, what do their current workforce want? People who've got all these delightful memories of old Toms, as we were saying. And on the other hand, what does the incoming workforce that we're trying to attract via TikTok want when they come in for a job?
And I think there's sort of company responsibility, but there's also individual responsibility. So what I'd say is if you're arranging lunch with somebody, rather than assume let's do that lunch on a Thursday, if your main objective of coming into the city on that Thursday is to have lunch with that person, have it on the Friday. You're still probably going to leave and be home at a reasonable hour compared to what we used to consider Fridays. You still have that level of flexibility. It's just that it doesn't need to be that if you're only meeting one person, why does it have to be on that Thursday? And I would say actually an interesting point. So certainly young people have a higher expectation to work from home flexibly, not all the time, but some degree of flexibility. But I do think there's another side to it, which isn't discussed enough. So as a young individual, quite often they want to come in because they do want to learn from others. They do want to feel part of a new team, a new business, something that's a very new experience, and they want that reassurance. They want to come in. And often when they are coming in, actually it's our age group of people who are less likely to want to come in, who have maybe a longer commute now because we've moved slightly out of the suburbs and you have commitments at home and you don't want to be socialising as much as you used to. So we're less likely to come in. So when they do come in to learn from people,
there's no one there. Yeah,
exactly that. So we need to make sure that we're creating an environment that works for them. And then they're maybe, actually no, they're not maybe. They are as a generation less likely to tell you what's on their mind when they think it might be a difficult conversation to have. So we need to create the environment where they are comfortable to do that. You say, what could we improve? How can we make this a better environment for you? What's missing? And just give them the space and freedom to say what's on their mind about it.
Yeah.
Time for the metaverse.
Well, it's super nuanced. I think there's going to be an element of how the economics of it works. If people are coming in more and those companies perform better and they then remunerate more for people who come in full time, you will get a bit of that, and then people have a choice, as your sort of flag example of going, you can go to these companies who will pay you less, but you can live out in the countryside and not have to commute and anything else. Or you come to this company who will pay you more, but you are expected to be in 4 or 5 days a week. And the career progression might be more aggressive there because because of that tenacity. But in much the same way you look at other businesses where you go to an investment bank out of school and you're going to work 85 hours a week and you're going to do that for the first 8 years of your career, and it's going to be horrible. But you're going to make a huge amount of money. If that's what you care about, this is the thing you're signing up for. And if you'd rather go to a much more less intense kind of business, and I think you'll see in this industry a little bit of that, people being like, here is the very intense carrier that you get paid a bunch more, you were expected to work full, in the office 40, 50 hours a week, and that will be that. But your likelihood of leaving that organization to be a leader in the industry will be higher. Or there's these other firms who offer this. And I think you'll see an element of that play out. And again, I don't think every company is going to back one position or another. I think you'll see a scattering there. But I think it will create a really interesting opportunity for people coming into the space around what do they want out of their careers. And they might not be, I want to be a CEO of AIG in my career. They might say, I want to move to this level and have enough to pay for a family, live in the country. Yeah. And that will exist, I think.
You've given me an idea. That I think companies could do as a benefit
Success.
That could actually help with it. See,
Box checked.
But what we could, because companies, of course, they're paying their rent for the full week, and they want people to come in on Fridays. One thing maybe we could look to do is that companies allow individuals to expense their train fare on a Friday. Because the cost of the train fare is absolutely, particularly for young professionals, that's an issue. So if you want to encourage them to come in on Fridays, then that feels like potentially a bit of a win-win out there.
There we go. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. So tell your manager to pony up the train ticket money. How do our listeners find out more about Empower, yourself, your team, your TikTok? Give us all of your socials.
Cool. Well, hopefully I'm not hard to find if I get it wrong. So TikTok, Empower Development, empower.development. But if you do type in Empower Development, you'll find us straight away. LinkedIn, Samantha Ridgewell. Have a podcast called Empower Talks, where we talk about people about their careers in insurance, so their journeys through their progression, that type of thing in there as well. And our website, empowerdevelopment.co.uk. We've got loads of free resources on our website, particularly for people starting out in their career. Feel free to just go in and take whatever you like. And then hopefully we can kind of make a difference for people and improve the knowledge accessibility.
Super helpful. Thank you. We have a ton of people in their careers who sort of listen to us as they get into reinsurance. So all that is going to be in the show notes, so they can click into that and learn more, discover more. Start the reinsurance module of your course after this, obviously.
First one.
And then work your way from there. But thank you so much, Samantha. This has been an absolute delight.
Thank you for having me.